Welcome to Bullshift, the podcast, the weekly podcast where we talk about behavioral economics as it pertains to individual investment decisions with a particular focus on optimism bias and how the financial services industry shifts your attention to make you feel more bullish. My name is John DeGoey. I'm the author of the book Bullshift, and I'm the host of the podcast. Welcome. This week, we don't have a guest, and that's because this is a special show. This is the 1 year anniversary of the release of the book Bullshift. It was in November of 2022 when I was at my home and a box of books arrived. And I was so excited that my baby, the idea of optimism bias being a real source of concern for the public, became manifest and the book arrived. I managed to share it with my clients at a client appreciation dinner later that month, and it made it into bookstores by the end of the year. Given that the podcast is now almost a year old, I thought this would be a good opportunity to take stock of where we've been and to share some good news about what's coming down the road as well, because I'm super excited about what 2024 and beyond have in store for people who are watching the podcast. I want to begin, therefore, by thanking you for being a supporter. It's been wonderful. The book came out a year ago. It was a labor of love. I started writing it when COVID hit in March of 2020. It took a lot of twists and turns, and I'm quite happy with the outcome. And I've had a lot of fascinating discussions with a lot of fantastic people, both on the podcast and separately, as a result of the book making it into the public domain. I want to focus on cognitive biases and behavioral biases going forward, as I always have. And I want to think about how, and I want my guests to think about, and my readers and listeners to think about how they make decisions. Decision making is an important consideration in life, and a lot of people haven't really thought about how they think. It's called meta thinking. And a lot of people just go about making decisions the way they always have without stopping to reflect upon thinking slowly. Is this really the right thing? What am I missing? What could I be doing differently? Am I just biased and anchored on something that I've done in the past? So the podcast will hopefully help people make better decisions and think through what they're going through in general in life. And in particular, I want to draw attention to the people who might be excessively optimistic. And I'm sensitive to this. I have a lot of people who try to portray me as being a downer, a negative person. I assure you that I too am an optimist. And the concern that I have is not that optimism is bad, but rather that excessive optimism is bad. It's a matter of being measured. It's a matter of being realistic and keeping things under control. And I think a lot of people, because they want things to go well, as we all do, it's human nature, tend to look at the bright side to the point of not even contemplating what could go wrong. And I think where we are at this moment in history, that's especially important. So that's why I wanted to do a special show today to talk about a modest pivot in the way the mandate for the podcast will be changing going forward. And I'm excited about it because I think it'll have a real chance to have a positive impact on people's lives. The first year's podcasts were evergreen, and they were the sorts of things that you could listen to at any time, anywhere, and the content would be current, but it would be relevant and it would not be tied to anything that was going on in the news. Going forward, while I would say the majority of podcasts will still be evergreen, we will start moving into the realm of what's happening with regard to current events, what's happening with capital markets, so that we can hopefully decode some of these things, we help people to make informed decisions and navigate what they're going through. So context is important, and the idea going forward will be that we will be looking at things as they unfold more often. Maybe not every show, maybe not even every second show, but a few of the shows will be looking at guests that will talk about what we're going through in the here and now, so that we can think about what decisions we're making in real time with our own portfolios, perhaps, but also with our lives and at work and with our spouses and what have you. I also want to talk to you about how we're doing so far on the podcast. Right now, as we come up on the 1 year anniversary of the book, and we're still about a month and a half or 2 months away from the 1 year anniversary of the podcast, we only have about 200 subscribers between the various platforms, Stitcher and Spotify, YouTube, what have you. So I'd love for that number to be higher. I know that only about 20% of the people who watch and listen are actually subscribed, which is to say, I know that there are a lot more people who watch and listen every week, but they don't necessarily subscribe. Please, if you can, like and subscribe. It does mean a lot. It helps the algorithms. It helps me get some better guests, and it allows me to feel that I'm making more of an impact as well. So if you can, I don't make the humble request often enough, but the humble request this time is please like, subscribe, do what you can to tell the story about Bullshift the podcast and how it can help you to make better decisions and navigate your life going forward. With that, I wanted to talk about why the mandate is going to be changing a little bit in the end of 2023 and into the new year. And that is a lot of what I talked about in the first half of Bullshift the book is the evergreen stuff, the cognitive biases, the ways that we look at things, the difference between traditional economics and behavioral economics, the assumption that people are self motivated, optimizing utility optimizers who know what's best for them and make rational decisions based on the all available information, and all those things that are presumptively true, but nonetheless demonstrably false. Going forward, I want to put that into the context of what's going on in the world. And here's where I'm going in particular. Many people, myself included, are of the opinion that we've been uniquely lucky for the past 75 or 80 years. Since the end of the Second World War, we've seen a lot of great things. We've had no meaningful global wars. We've had unprecedented economic growth and technological development. We've had the benefits of globalization come along so that we've liberalized trade and made more money as a result of all those good things and lowered prices. We've had a 40-year-long bull market in bonds as interest rates have gone from all-time highs in the early 80s to effectively zero about a year and a half ago, and that's over. So what we're looking at now, unfortunately, is a world that seems to have changed. I can say that it is changing, but I will go so far as to say that the world has already changed. I'm not alone in my thinking. Nouriel Rubini, in his new book Mega Threats, which came out also about a year ago, enunciates 10 different things that are challenges going forward for the world order. And they are things that we need to navigate as we plan our finances and think about capital markets and how we will behave if we run into tough times. Those things include war, and this is the weekend of remembrance. And so lots of people are wearing their poppies, and I want to give thanks to the people whose service is keeping us free and safe here in Canada and throughout the Western world. 18 months ago, we had a war that was initiated by Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, and it's something that I and my family have had to deal with personally because my wife is Ukrainian. But also, in the past 5 weeks or so, we've had a situation where Hamas has attacked Gaza and all of the horrific loss of life of civilians on both sides and the ongoing war that's been going there with no real signs of stopping and possible signs of escalation, which is exactly what happened in the First World War. So we have a situation right now where the world order is decidedly unstable in a way that it has not been, perhaps since the Cuban Missile Crisis, and with that exception, probably not since the end of the Second World War. If you think of the doomsday clock that different organizations will point to in terms of the risk of global annihilation, it is closer to midnight now than it has been perhaps ever. And there's a real risk that we could have war and all the things that go with that in terms of economic disruption, personal hardship that could be coming. And I'm not certainly not wishing it upon anyone. I'm asking people to contemplate the possibility of this might happen. And if it happens, am I prepared? What can I do now to prepare for it? Tough times not only include the possibility of war, but economically, even without a war, we are now in a situation where debt levels in Canada and the US and much of the Western world are at all time highs, or at least post World War II highs. So governments are in debt in a way that they have not been in debt previously. Households are in debt in a way that they have not been in debt previously. And of course, now we have interest rates that are at a 30-year high. So the cost of carrying those debts is becoming punitive, and that is the sort of thing that a lot of people who have that are alive today have either never had to deal with or may have read about in the papers when they were children, but have not had to deal with on a meaningful basis. And it's now part of their reality, and it's not likely to go away. It'll probably be with us for at least another decade, and quite possibly the remainder of most of the lives of most of the people that are watching and listening today. Deglobalization is a concern that people need to think about. We've had a situation where not only are there hot wars going on, but there seems to be an ongoing Cold War now that's escalating between specifically the United States and China for trade partners and what that means. And we all learned with COVID uh, we learned about things like supply chains and inflation being rising as a result of supply chains being disrupted and inflation being persistent and the sort of thing that how those things are a drag on economic growth. There's a very, very genuine concern that we are heading into a period of what is called stagflation, which is the GDP, the gross domestic product of Western nations, stalls to the point where the economies stop growing, while inflation remains a persistent concern. That's a horrible combination because in the past we've managed to quote unquote grow our way out of problems, and a lot of people have been optimistic that we can do this going forward. I would like to be optimistic about doing that as well. I am less optimistic than many, however, because I don't see a tangible way forward, and I'm looking for one. Believe me, a lot of people are looking for ideas about what they can do to make things better going forward. I'm just not as certain that that's what we're actually in for economically. What that means for capital markets, of course, is anyone's guess. No one knows. No one has a crystal ball. Certainly, I do not purport to have a crystal ball. My concern is that a lot of investors are optimistically saying, "Oh, we got through this last time, so we'll get through it again." Well, that's possibly true, but not necessarily true. Think about what happened with COVID. The market drawdown lasted about 5 weeks. That's it, 5 weeks. The markets dropped by 33% in 5 weeks in February and March of 2020, and then resumed in what seemed to be an inexorable climb for the next year and 3 quarters until the rate hikes of 2022 put an end to that. And 2022 was actually a very challenging year for a lot of investors because both stocks and bonds lost double digits that year as a result of the recalibration, the renormalization of interest rates in order to try to tame inflation. That battle is not over. Central bankers throughout the world are talking about how there is very little respite on the horizon, and higher for longer is the phrase that we are hearing from central bankers everywhere. The expectation is that interest rates will be maintained probably at least until the middle of 2024. Again, no one knows, but that's what central bankers are signaling. And for those of people who want to be optimistic, I will caution you once again that be realistic as well. If you want to be optimistic that rates will be lowered before the second half of 2024, just remember that the most likely reason that rates will be lowered before then is because the economy will be in recession, people will be losing jobs, people will be losing homes. So the good news is rates will be lower. The bad news is rates will likely be lower because the economy is going to be going through some very challenging times. I'm not wishing any of this upon anyone. I am simply asking people now, and this is part of why I wrote Bullshift, to contemplate now, while they can, while times are still relatively good, what they will do if, in fact, these bad things come to pass. I don't want to be Chicken Little. I never wanted to be a person who was dramatic. But I do want to help people navigate what could be a very challenging environment. And if in fact what many people think is going to happen comes to pass, and again, I've actually expected bad things to happen before now. And ironically, I will confess that when I was writing Bullshift, I was concerned that bad things would start happening before the book came out, and that I wouldn't be able to warn people and ask them to reflect upon what they were doing to prepare themselves for a world that is more challenging. And if they weren't unwittingly being more optimistic about what the world might look like, and to perhaps think about what they could do proactively to manage the risk, perhaps of a job loss, just building a safety net, having a cash cushion, doing whatever, perhaps taking risk off the table with their portfolio, moving to diversify more, to move from growth stocks to value stocks, from the high end of the yield curve to the shorter end of the yield curve to keep bonds shorter, maybe to move toward better credit quality, to find other assets that might be good diversifiers, what have you. There are a number of things that can be done. I am reticent to advocate any of them specifically. Everyone's situation is different, but I will say that this is a situation where the tea leaves seem to be suggesting that times could be difficult. And I'm asking you to check your own biases at the door and to reflect upon whether or not you're being too optimistic about the future. I do not. I cannot stress this. I'm going to say this boldly, and I'm underlining it. I'm writing it in block capitals. I'm not a pessimist. I'm not trying to be a downer. I am trying to help people to reflect upon what might be coming and to do what they can to prepare now while they can, while there's still time, to proactively think about what they can do differently to deal with the risk of being overly optimistic and having a bit of a rose-colored glasses view to what the future might hold. Um, a lot of what I do in the podcast ends with two important sections. The first is that's Bullshift, where I ask people to talk about things that they are unhappy with. And ironically, I would say about half of my guests have identified financial literacy as a concern, and that's ironic because November is Financial Literacy Month. So I thought it would be a good time to do a hat tip to the people, the many guests that I've had on the podcast over the past while who have said they want more financial literacy. I could not agree more. It would be great if we could do more to help with financial literacy. That's one of the many, many public policy challenges that we all have as a society as a result of bullshift and happily muddling through thinking that we'll be fine because our parents and our grandparents were fine. They had a lot of tailwinds. We as a generation and our children will likely be facing headwinds, and it will be more challenging for us. The second thing that I do always on the podcast is I end with shift happens. And that's because I'm not trying to be a downer. And I ask people to identify matters that could be improved upon. And then I invite them themselves to come up with possible solutions to the problems they've identified because I'm trying to find a way forward. And that's going to be a lot of the focus of Bullshift the podcast in 2024 and beyond as well, is that I'm looking for ways to make things better, to help people deal with the challenges that are likely, but not certainly, on the horizon. Let's talk about it now. So, I don't have a crystal ball, but I do want to take a clear eyed view toward what might be coming on the horizon. To that end, I want to share with you that I've got some excellent guests lined up in the not too distant future. And again, remember, we're going to be talking a little bit more about context. And that's going to start with next week's episode, where I have Dave Wall, who is a senior executive with Franklin Templeton. And Franklin Templeton does a monthly session with advisors across the world called Anatomy of a Recession. And in it, they look at a number, I think maybe 15 or 16 different indicators that using a stoplight sort of scenario with a red, green, and yellow, low, medium, high, a risk of it being an indicator of a recession being on the horizon. Of all the many, many signals, almost all of them are flashing red right now. And so the people at Franklin Templeton and their sub-advisor ClearBridge Investments are of the very strong opinion that there is a recession on the horizon. So Dave Wall will be our guest next week. And I want to stress as well, a recession and a bear market are different things. Frequently, the bear markets come before the recession because stock markets are leading indicators. And we haven't had any kind of a firm confirmation that we're in a recession yet in Canada, although that may be coming literally in the next couple of weeks once the GDP numbers are released for Q3. So think about what we might be doing to prepare yourself with regard to the economy. Your job, is your job safe? Maybe business will slow down. Maybe you'll have fewer clients or fewer customers or what have you. And then also with regard to your portfolio, the second thing, capital markets. They're different things. The economy and the stock market are different things, but they tend to follow one another. They correlate positively, and oftentimes the stock market drops before a recession is announced. And there are no cases in modern history where the stock market hits a bottom before the recession starts. So if the recession hasn't started yet, it's likely, again, no one is certain, but it's likely that we will be having the stock market going lower rather than higher in the near term. Something to think about. What are you doing? Are you prepared? Can you handle it? The following week, I'm going to be talking with my friend Preet Banerjee. Preet recently got a PhD, and he is a columnist, an author, and a consultant to the financial services industry. Preet and I will be talking about the value of financial advice. This is an area which is rife with bullshit, as you may or may not know. A lot of advisors like to talk a good game about the great things they do, and I agree. Most advisors do great things. Advisors are by no means homogenous. There's a wide range of good, bad, and otherwise. The very large majority of advisors are good, well-intended people who try to do good things for their clients, and for the most part, most of them succeed. But there are blind spots, and there are instances where the industry might be perhaps overplaying its hand a little bit. So I want to talk to Preet about that and help you to understand what your advisor is doing for you, perhaps help you to work more constructively with your advisor, and if you have one, and even to reflect upon what you're doing if you're working as a self-directed investor, what you can be doing differently, how you can reflect upon your own decision making, check yourself, look in the mirror, and see what maybe might be done differently. And that might include switching to having an advisor. We'll see. The following week after that, at the end of November, I'm going to be talking to John Paul Bureau. JP is the president and CEO of FAIR Canada. FAIR stands for the Foundation for the Advancement of Investor Rights. So it's a consumer advocacy group helping investors get a fair shake in the financial services industry. This is the sort of thing that I have been talking about, if you know me, for a very long time. I talked about it at length in my first book, The Professional Financial Advisor. I talked about it in great length in my second book, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry. And I touch on it. It's not as much of a part of what's in Bullshift, but I touch on it in Bullshift as well. A lot of what needs to happen is the industry, as it professionalizes, needs to move toward helping ordinary investors get a fair shake by working with advisors that are true professionals, that are transparent, that have credentials, that use continuing education and do everything they can that you think when you think of a professional, a doctor, a dentist, a lawyer, an accountant. I just got my tooth filled yesterday because I had a filling fallout, and the process that my dentist used was predictable, repeatable, consistent as far as I can tell with all clients. Those are the sorts of things that you should be expecting from a financial professional as well. And you might want to think about whether or not you're getting that. So we can talk about that with Jean Paul and to see what is being done to protect you as an investor. So that's what's on the horizon for the not too distant future. Once again, I want to thank you. It's been a wonderful first year for Bullshift the book. It's been a wonderful 10 and a half months for Bullshift the podcast. I'm excited for the future. Please, once again, like, subscribe, tell your friends, and I will be seeing you next time. And I'll be seeing you every Thursday when we release new issues of Bullshift the podcast.
John DeGooey is a portfolio manager in Toronto and the author of the book Bullshift: How Optimism Bias Threatens Your Finances. Bullshift is available online and in bookstores everywhere. The opinions expressed in this podcast should not be construed as investment advice. Bullshift, the podcast, is produced by TalkShoe, a division of IOTM.